Welcome back to another episode of the Higher Love with Megan podcast, talking all things holistic health and mind, body, soul, healing and expansion with me, your host, Megan Cooper. This podcast seeks out wisdom for how to live better, to support our bodies, liberate our minds, open our hearts and nourish our souls so that we can expand into our fullest expression and live with love, vitality and freedom. If you are returning to this space, please do take a moment to rate the show, or you can head to Apple Podcasts to leave a review, all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. If you're new here, welcome, and it's great to connect. Celebrating you for dedicating your time to self-discovery and reconnection. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Up on the podcast this week, we have Chris Geisler. Chris is the host of the Chris Geisler Podcast, a podcast to explore our nature and nurture a meaningful life. He is the founder of Men of Earth, a space for men to connect, learn, rewild, be accountable, and gain clarity on their mission. He runs a private online men's community dedicated to inner work and self-leadership. And in this exact moment, he might be in a cold plunge since he's leading a 21-day cold water challenge which started on the 1st of November. I connected with Chris recently, and what came through most was his commitment to nurturing a meaningful life, both for himself and facilitating that in others. Bringing that alive in this conversation, Chris draws attention to what this really means, including connection and community, purpose and mission, and creating the life that we really want. His personal mission centers around creating more spaces where we can access more parts of ourselves that we have forgotten about or let go of, and using attention and intention to bring these parts back, whether that is through a podcast conversation, retreats and group spaces or challenges, or on the dance floor. Of course, we all want a meaningful, nurturing life, but what does that actually mean? What does it mean to live a meaningful, nurturing life? I hope that this conversation opens up some new inspiration and sows some good seeds for you. Enjoy. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and sharing space and wisdom with us today. So great to have you here. Thank you.
To be here, Megan. This is exciting. I have a very excitable energy kicking off over here.
In the podcast studio in the van.
Yeah.
Podcast Man Palace. Excellent. Okay, so the main topic that we landed on to create together today was around creating a nurturing, meaningful life. So I would love for you to just kick us off with, what does living a nurturing, meaningful life mean to you today?
It's interesting. The first thing that comes up is happiness being a byproduct of living a meaningful life, connecting to our purpose. And for me, that's never been something I thought I was born with. I think somewhat we are born with circumstances and environments we're born into, and that shapes and forms us dramatically. I think when I look back at the last decade of like deep diving into the human experience, I feel, and I've landed on the conclusion that we are and can be so much as humans, but just like H2O, water, it depends so much on temperature, environment, pressure. Like there's so many factors that go into what shapes and forms us as humans. And when I think about my journey of really trying to live well, like it's just trying to live well, like really trying to understand who I am and where my ancestors spent so much of their time, and us as humans, what environments are we meant to thrive in, and what lifestyles can we thrive in the most. It's really been a process of that, because at times in my life I've definitely not felt well, and that's the precursor for change. It's like, oh, there's things that aren't quite right here and don't feel quite good. So the purpose has definitely come in as a result of all of that. Feeling well enough to actually pursue something and choose something that is meaningful, what brings us meaning. I think we're hardwired for connection, where it makes us feel good. Like there's no Phoebe on Friends, like letting a bee sting her in the park. It's like there are no selfless good deeds. I remember that episode. So funny. There are no selfless good deeds. We feel good when we do good things, and when we feel good, we want to do good.
Mm.
And that's what's made the most sense to me. So yeah, living a purposeful life, it's really a choice. I feel like there's so much choice within it. And I'm on the
Mm.
fence with free will. Like I'm on the fence. I could be persuaded either way because
I hear you. Yeah.
there's some pretty hard evidence. Like if you dive into like Robert Sapolsky's work, and yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting realm to dive in. But I think we have a choice. We can have a choice of what brings us purpose. But it comes at a choice. You can
Mm.
dig and look back at your childhood and see what you were gravitated towards and what most fulfilled you as a child. But I feel like we have a lot of choice, but then there's the paradox of choice, as I'm sure it's the counter to that. And then with too much choice,
Indeed.
and we really, yeah, can freeze in that. And I think that's a paradigm of our time. There's
Yeah.
of us in the West. Obviously, we have to bring into the conversation people that don't get to choose.
Mm.
I don't want to sit on the podcast and think that we all have a choice, because a lot of people have less. But then probably quite a seminal book, actually, that I'll mention, Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning,
Yeah.
Human Search for Meaning. That's a really big one, because that is someone that was in the worst possible situation imaginable. All of your family gone. You're in this awful, like heavily suffering spot, where everyone around you is just starving to death, and you're forced to work. And if anyone doesn't know, like, it's such a powerful book, and it's such a reframe of, like, when I catch people, um, from my point of view, lacking perspective on how much they do have. And there's a fine balance here between, not bypassing the human experience, which, it's important to honor the suffering when it's there and the sadness, and not think, well, I've got it better than these people, because the comparing never really helps. But in reference to the book, it is perspective. I think perspective is the biggest, most important word on the planet, because
Mm.
when we have perspective on something, it really helps us lean into a situation that's not serving us, but having perspective on it. Like, he had this perspective that there could be a time where I don't have this, and he noticed a significant difference in Auschwitz, the concentration camps, where the people that gave up and they lost hope and they lost
Mm.
faith. And we talked before, and I've always had this interesting perspective of, like, seeing the light and knowing it doesn't have to be this way, and it's going to take a lot of work, but it can be very different. I just have to do that work and go through the processes of finding that meaning and purpose.
Mm. Yeah, I remember in our last conversation, you were talking about possibility and wanting to bring that to others. So I guess what you're just bringing there, of this connecting to hope and seeing that I'm in this now, but I want to be somewhere else, and it might be a little bit tricky to get there,
Mm-hmm.
but step by step. So what do you feel possibility brings into your life?
Yeah, interesting. Possibility. I think managing there's something called possibility management, I think. Like,
Yeah,
managing what's possible in this moment.
yeah.
Because everything's possible. Like, really, there's a
Mm.
lot. There's a lot that's possible for us. Again, back to that choice, but managing what's possible in the moment and what you can do about it right now. It's like, underestimate what you do in a year, but overestimate what you can do in a day.
Mm.
Most people do that. So I think managing your possibilities in the moment, of what you can get done today and work
Mm.
towards. We definitely have a condition of quick fixes, as I'm sure you know,
Yes, for sure.
not just in healthcare, but in many areas of our lives. We do want that thing just to come in and have, like, a shortcut. But
Mm.
sorry to break it to you, there's no shortcuts. There's just none, as you know very well. And you have to go through it, right? You have to go
Mm.
through and in,
Mm.
go within or go without. Like, that's definitely been a mantra of mine, like going within ourselves. But the possibilities, yeah, it's interesting. I have to sit with that for maybe a little bit longer. But yeah, it's interesting to think about what your possibilities are.
Mm. Yeah, indeed. I love that. Was it go within or go without?
Yeah.
Was that your yeah, love that. I'm gonna start coining that for myself. Love that. So what do you spend your time doing these days that is most meaningful to you, or perhaps most purposeful for you, since you brought purpose in as such a key part of this nurturing, meaningful life? What do you spend your time doing?
Yeah, what brings me the most purpose is having a mission. A
Mm,
mission makes sense to me. Maybe as a man, I can speak as a man, but a mission feels like an overarching direction, which brings me purpose, brings me meaning, but it also is never complete. And it's something that I will potentially pass down through um, my children and people I meet, maybe, and they'll connect with the mission. I think goals are more personal and there's room for them. But ultimately, when you get the goal, you achieve the goal changes, the goalposts
mm,
move, and it's a little different to how you felt before. And when you get it, it's kind of interesting. It's like you're always going to feel different or how you thought about the goal. But a mission is like this overarching thing. And I've landed at mine and it maybe it may change. Like I also let go of that, but the discipline to continue and keep refining it. And it's been to create spaces where we can access all parts of ourselves. Because through observing many spaces, as we all do, in our communities, in our culture, we lack spaces that we can show up fully. And we
mm,
can talk about the masks we all wear and the authenticity that perhaps isn't there in certain
mm,
environments. And it's not coherent in all of our areas of life. But I think the more spaces we can create, and I can create, whether that's through a podcast medium or through a conversation with someone down the street or creating a men's circle or creating a cold water challenge. It's like, how can we really connect with something? But the biggest thing is bringing everything in that moment, all of the inner landscape, all the stuff that we all navigate through together, the challenge, the obstacles, um, the pain, the stuff that really does define us as humans, the human experience in totality. Because when we don't look at some of it, it gets forced into the shadow. And I've
mm,
definitely leaned into that school of thought around like Carl Jung and what the shadow actually means in a psychological sense. It gets forced into the shadow when we don't bring those things, and then we end up judging others for it. And it's really interesting. It's like the projection, like the things that you don't accept about yourself are the things you
mm,
project onto other people, and it comes out in like these not nice ways. But it's creating spaces like, well, what are the ingredients for that? Like creating a space that we can access all parts of ourselves. We need to feel safe. We need to feel
mm,
seen. And from what I've learned in being a part of many of these spaces, that we just need the environment because we are all so wise and we all have so much to bring. Like there's never an event or a retreat or a circle that I'm a part of that I don't recognize something in everyone there. And it's just the environment that creates that. It's so interesting. When we think about environment, it really impacts us. And environment's made up of people as well. It's not just like the green that we can see or the nature that we're in. It's the people that are there and how they feel and how that impacts us. Um, but ultimately, it comes down to us. It's like go within because we only ever know our experience and the perception of others.
yeah.
So, what do other people in certain environments um, kind of make you feel about yourself? Because often it's like, do you feel judgment? Do you feel shame? Do you feel not loved? And often that's a reflection of how you feel about yourself. And it's those types of questions and pointers that allow people to then reflect on, okay, like how do I feel about myself? How do you feel about yourself when you're by yourself? And like really bringing that into spaces, the
Mm,
internal landscape, it's that inner work. It's the work, I guess, as Nicole
mm,
Perrier would define it. And that's shifted because we have the time and space and energy to work on these things now.
mm,
Um, yeah, our parents and their parents likely didn't. even though it feels like we've got less time than ever.
Yeah.
But we've definitely got some time to dedicate to these things, and resources and information, and the wide
Mm.
web of like how much can shift so quickly in the collective. So yeah, I went
Mm.
off on many different tangents there, I'm
That
sure.
all of the tangents are welcome. They're all excellent. So bring
Well,
in all the tangents.
I would say also like pain into purpose. That's been a big
Yeah.
one, big thread of like the pain that, and these are all words. I'm also so aware of like terminologies and words, and we already put things in boxes when we label it. Like
Yeah.
sometimes in relationships we do that, of like when we label someone else, we're really defining them, and it
Mm.
limits what's possible. And the pain that we experience, I think that can really turn into what brings us purpose. Like I remember hearing Jack Cornfield on a podcast a long time ago, and he said, "Don't save the world because you hate it, like you hate what's going on, so you're like fighting against it, but save the world because you love it."
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. So that pain, what breaks your heart, can really turn into the problems you want to solve. And I think that
Mm.
is really purposeful
Yeah. Yeah.
for the things that really we don't like. Maybe it's about ourselves. Maybe it's like, oh, I'm not great in relationships. Like there's always so much conflict. Maybe dive into that and be the
Mm.
person that's really alchemized what that was. Like all the books we read, they're the people that have gone through it and are likely still going through it.
Mm.
Mark Manson has a book, and he needs that book for himself more than anyone.
Mm.
It's so fascinating that most people in that self-help, well, they're the people who need it. They're doing it for themselves first. Like me,
Yeah.
I need to hear all these things for myself, and as a byproduct of that, other people benefit.
Yeah. You teach what you most need yourself, as they say.
Yeah, so
So,
true.
on that, what were the problems that you were seeking to solve that brought you up to this mission? What do you feel was lacking in your life leading you onto this path?
Mm, interesting. What's lacking? I think so much,
Mm.
and it's quite overwhelming at times because I feel like the way that we live is really disconnecting, and
Mm.
I'm aware and sometimes cautious of my perception on things. It's not everyone's, and to like pick apart everything is just too consuming. And
Yeah.
it's really it can feel very overwhelming to people when they start bringing more awareness to their day to day. And for me, it was about that. It was like becoming more aware and actually like going back to see what things I was wrong about.
Mm.
And I think that's a powerful way in. It was for me. So whether that's the way we walk, the way we move, the way we sit, the way we breathe, the way we sit on the toilet, what shoes we wear,
Mm.
I was really piecing things together of like so much just didn't make sense. I went traveling for a couple of years, and I really started to evaluate the way people lived and like what I was potentially wrong about, and the way people lived back home. The things you just take as a given. You take the food you eat. Oh, it's just what we eat. It's like, well, maybe not. Like maybe it's definitely not what it's just the way it is. And I think unless we are leaning into more awareness and self-awareness in modern times, we're going to suffer more
Mm.
than ever, because the world is so convoluted and humans don't tell the story anymore.
Mm.
Corporations tell the story. For
Mm.
whatever reason that is, it's problematic because you don't get firsthand knowledge from people. It's more like consuming media, and then that's how we pick up things and what's normal to us. Like you need that thing, or you need everyone's trying to sell to you because you're not enough. Well, it makes you feel not enough because it's like, well, if I was healthy, happy, and whole, like I was born that way, then why would I need all this stuff? And it's interesting. So I'd say for me, I was having what I've come to understand is like healthy reactions to environments and circumstances that didn't serve me.
Mm.
So it wasn't necessarily like I took on all the pain of like anxiety and depression. I kind of knew that they were signals for something. I was never like personalizing it, which I feel we do also in the West. It's very individualistic, and that's how we sometimes think. Um, as like me as an individual, I'm broken. There must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
But for me, I was like, well, before we get to that and like buy into the chemical things in the brain being wrong, and I was like, well, where are the happiest people in the world? Like, where do they exist? And like go there, like understand more about where people are thriving. And I think if you really needed to find someone who was happy and connected and healthy, you'd have to go into like the corners of the world, into like tribes, as
Mm.
know. We know like blue zones, but it also like natural people of the world that are still living in accordance with their environment and have a healthy connection to it, and also spirit and food, local, and they don't need anything else. Like we watched this through films when we were growing up and stuff, and it's there, and we kind of get it. Like we do get it. Like some cultures, they don't have words for depression. They don't have words to describe some of the pathologies that we have. So it's really like exploring that thing, for me, going back and understanding for 99% of our existence, like how do we live? How do we move? How do we breathe? How do we sleep? How do we connect? What was the social dynamics like? And then through a process of that, I really started to understand like what environments day to day I need to exist in, how I need to live, what social groups I need to surround myself with. I think community has been a big one for me, of like understanding community and how important it is to have many people that you can count on, um, and who can hold space for you and not project their own reality onto you and tell you what you need and have too many opinions. So yeah, I'd say just going trying to kind of sum up the question, day to day, I'm definitely getting my feet on the earth, like eating as natural food as possible, being outside. And we almost have all science to back all this up. And it really baffles me because I'm like, we don't need to know the studies for being outdoors or like being in the woods. Like, of course, it's a natural environment. It's vibrant. There's no straight lines. It's just
Yeah.
the eyes relax and we just feel better. It lowers blood pressure, cortisol, and your heart rate. And it's yes, that's the environment we're meant to thrive in.
Mm.
And and it and once you start seeing it, then you have to really I had to really like sacrifice some things, especially with community and like
Mm.
developing relationships that I wanted. Had to really spend the time committing to that, because it doesn't happen overnight. And no, it's not, the woods aren't accessible to everyone. So it's like, how can I work towards something like that? And then you have to, yeah, cultivate the patience and the fortitude to navigate all the
Mm.
things to kind of put yourself in those positions. It's definitely not easy. But yeah, feet on the earth, good food, and cold water, of course, as we'll talk about, and like the real practices that are simple and make sense.
Mm. Awesome. In terms of what you were talking to there, sacrificing things in
Mm.
pursuit of community, what did sacrificing things look like? What type of things did you have to sacrifice?
Being alone, being
Mm.
really lonely for a while, but knowing that I needed to spend the time with myself, sacrificing,
Mm.
I guess, connection. It can come in forms of, I guess it's packaged as like a distraction of like just being around people all the time. But that was definitely a compromise, or a sacrifice of needing to let go of certain people that didn't serve like what I was building or the mission that I was on. And that's not easy. It's actually one of the hardest things, I think, one of the most overlooked and not really talked about aspects of um moving into more awareness or more wholeness or health.
Mm.
When we make that choice, it's like we have to let go of a few things have to die, the version of
Mm.
ourselves has to die that people relate to and love, and that's not easy. So definitely that was one sacrifice. I mean, fashion, that was probably a big one that I'm like, guess I'm not cool anymore if I'm wearing like Vivo barefoot shoes, but I was that committed. And also that's a reference to, I think the world works in ways there's natural laws you could talk about, like the pull of the law of attraction, and the things that you commit to. And when you say yes to something, other things just do appear. It's like how there's this interesting exchange going on where you choose to just commit to something and then other things just start appearing. It's almost like a test of how willing you are to go after the thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole jump and the net will appear.
Parachute. Yeah, the parachute is the parachute for me, I think. Jump
Yeah.
and like, or build your wings on the way down. Don't wait for your wings to open. You've got to jump and they will appear. It's nuanced though. It's not easy to really, for someone who doesn't have that perspective. Because I've at times in my life it's like, yeah, I'll just hit the road and I'll go around the world with a £10 in my pocket and some blank sheets of paper, and I'll just make my way. And it's not always turned out particularly beneficial, but I've always known that, like, ultimately you're safe, really. And there's so much unexplainable things. It's like, yeah, you just lean into that.
And then that in itself builds the trust as well to go forward, right?
Yeah, trust. I think trust is a big thing. Like, find out what you want to, what are you trusting? Like the unexplainable nature of everything. Like, ultimately, like, nothing can be really explained. There's so much room for that. Like, can you trust in some sort of bigger, yeah, maybe it's not a plan, maybe it's not like everything happens for a reason. I don't feel that's true for me, but it's leaning into what can you trust that you don't know. Stop trying to find out, stop trying to trying to know. We don't know things, and just surrender to that. And it's a process of getting out of your own way. If anyone's heard that before, and I think that's just, we dive into the knowing of everything. It's again another of our times where it's like, I think before I think, therefore I am. And that's just not true. Your thoughts are definitely not you. And this yeah, the last couple of thousand years of like thinking our way into things and out of things, it actually gets in the way of just being. And I think definitely our generation have lent into that, of like, be more, like, be more human, be. And it's the yin and the yang, it's the being and doing. Nothing exists in both, but it's the song dooby dooby doo.
Yeah, love it. So many great quotes from this podcast. So I'll have lots of mantras to go away with.
I'm just plucking them out, aren't I? Definitely not got them written down anywhere.
The disconnection and the isolation that you were kind of pointing to earlier, how was that presenting itself in your life before you started to make a change and really start to do that inner work on yourself? How was that disconnection actually manifesting for you?
Yeah, definitely in my later teens, it was resulting in, it would actually manifest and come out like when unconscious, when drunk, when, in those environments, a lot of anger that was pent up, that like just behavior that was just very unhealthy. So I'd get into a lot of fights and I'd justify it because it was the alcohol. But as we know, it's like, well, what's that? You can hide behind that, but you're making the decision. Not everyone's going around doing this who drinks. So yeah, that was definitely resulting in that. It was, yeah, it was a real disconnect, really, of like not feeling safe, not feeling trusted, and not feeling loved, really, by myself more than anyone. I think when we're unable to be loved, or we don't feel love from other people, it's generally a reflection of how much love do we have for ourselves. And that was just never a theme. It was never a thing. So it kind of, it empowers me because it doesn't leave it on me. I didn't never felt like the responsibility was all on me, but because of that, I think that ended up in me not taking any responsibility, because I'd justify my behavior from what else was going on, or I'd kind of, yeah, things would happen in environments, and I'd be like, it's not kind of me, it's the other people around me. And that's
Mm.
somewhat true, but it's also like, at what point do you then start to say it's not because of me, but it's on me?
At what point do you feel like you really started to take responsibility to say, this is actually all on me? What was the catalyst there?
Hmm. I think definitely a rite of passage, potentially. You could view it in that, of like
Mm.
leaving the hometown, like going to university, surrounding myself with people who actually had a passion for learning and
Mm.
being curious a little bit more than more rigid. You could look at that as like a window out of like mum and dad's nest. And that was a responsibility. That was like
Mm.
taking a responsibility of changing the environment and pursuing something and having a direction. I think
Mm.
it's hard to be present when you have no direction.
Yeah.
That's really hit home when I heard that. And yeah, I started to kind of forge a direction for myself, because there's a lot of lost boys, and I was definitely one of them. And it's like,
Mm.
well, what are we agreeing on as a, how are we collectively agreeing on things, or is it just a load of craziness that exists? And it's like, what are we sharing? I think values, and like, we could definitely agree on a lot of moral, ethical things in our culture, but I think agreeing on certain things really helps us connect with others. And if I'm honest, I don't think I really took responsibility until I was traveling, which was after university. At university, I was still living a bit like outlandish and a bit wild.
Don't think you
And
were alone there.
I know I say it like I was the only one, but in terms of like the consciousness of me, not just
Yeah.
like, you know, letting loose and enjoying myself, which I definitely did. I connected a lot to community at university.
Mm.
And I think after that, that's when I slipped into like loneliness and depression. And it was like, oh, wow, now I'm out there,
Mm.
and I've really got to like make some decisions and choose certain things. I don't think forever in my life, I was always following other people, like
Mm.
definitely a follower. And it wasn't until like taking responsibility of like self leadership of like how I want to show up and what's most important to me. And I don't really feel like our education system does that. Doesn't really doesn't really cultivate an environment for that. You might go see your career advisor and they might ask you a few questions, but it probably does. But for those that haven't got that ability, like how is it helping the people that don't feel connected to certain things, you know?
Mm.
But yeah, it wasn't until after university that I traveling, and that just opened me up, opened my heart up, I think, more than
Mm.
anything. I
Mm.
really allowed myself to feel, again, the head just carries the way. We are like head led instead of heart led. And the heart opened up. And due to other few people actually who came into my life, that was really big catalysts. I think it's really important to honor the people that have come in and shifted a lot for us, inspired us, connected with us, saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I think that is a big, big overlooked thing around. I think, especially for men, it's really important as in our adolescence for other men to see us and be like I see you. And I've had that a few times, been lucky enough to have that of a few people seeing something in me that I didn't see myself. But that really helps. That really
Mm.
shifts a lot, I think. Allows us to, yeah, to honor that part of us that we perhaps wasn't able to for a while.
What were your experiences of those people coming into your life? Was that when you were away traveling, or who were those people that came in for you and saw you in a different way?
I think definitely
Mm.
Tony's I I mentioned Tony Riddle, like a lot of his work, his work, and I hear his voice going, it's not my work. It's like his his commitment to this, speaking to this natural philosophy of like what makes sense to us as a human. What there's an amazing quote that I always say: it's nothing makes sense in biology if it's not in light of evolution. And it's like, we're an animal. Like, we have to have that conversation. Like, we are an animal. We are not different. Look into nature. Like, nature was actually a big teacher. And I don't grew up like that. Like you say, who saw me? Maybe there was like a part of me that was like, I need a mentor. Like, good God, like someone just appear. And my friend said to me, "Was like, well, look to nature as your mentor. Like, what can you learn through that?" And it was powerful reframe. But the people that came into my life, there's definitely Tony, and then definitely a few friends that have really seen me and just reflected things back to me.
And that process of your heart opening, what was that experience like after so much disconnection and isolation before? What was that experience like for you?
Very overwhelming. It's like a very big experience, like a plant ceremony would be, or like a big shattering of like who I thought I was, who I thought I wasn't, and what I thought was possible. So like going traveling and really connecting to like feeling other people's pain and learning through experience, not vicariously through the TV or newspapers. I started to lean into like how things felt for me and just have like really connected experience with people. I mean, the beautiful thing about traveling, I talk about a lot, and it's you connect with people who are really curious. They're yes people. They're like, the answer to how you do something is yes, and you just go and you just do, and you just say yes more. Yeah, it was a really just big opening of the heart, like feeling again, and feeling like going deep with emotion and just crying in moments and connecting back to the times. There was a big experience of me of like getting a visa into Australia when I was traveling, and it was revisiting the times where I would have acted in ways that really were just not nice, like really unkind, really unhealthy and damaging for a lot of people. And I'd never revisited that. I just parked it and moved on and thought that was enough, But then traveling allowed me to, and created situations to allow me to go back there and just rewrite that story and not carry that energy in my heart anymore, like the hate in my heart that was for those times. There was a lot of hate there. And I heard something the other day around being embodied, and you can't be embodied if there's hate in your heart, because you're made of love. And I was like, okay, there's a lot to that. That's really interesting. And love's an interesting word, but there's an energy to it. There's a frequency that we all connect on, and knowing what that feels like to be really open. And yeah, there was opportunities to go back there and rewrite the stories of really the shame that I'd carry of like doing those things, but really like lean into it and just create space for the grief also. And that's been a process over time, actually, creating space for grief, because as I'm sure you'd agree, it's like the anger that comes with that, and the frustration and the real grieving that was needed. Francis Weller talks about grief in a really big way, and I really connect with it. Creating spaces to grieve, because it's well, you look around, you're like, can I grieve? Like, you go to this different I guess like funerals, like what's it like there to grieve? Does it feel? I was at a funeral the other week, and I was actually at the back with a lot of like older people, and it was very stale, the air. And I felt that really interesting, because I don't know, it really felt like, can people grieve? Is it easy for people to grieve? What does that look like for people? Because it's a big process that needs to happen. And there's like different stages of grief. And yeah, the resistance that comes with it for start, and not accepting. And I think it's important to come through that cycle. There's a whole schools of thought around and how it does affect our psychology, and not just grieving for ourselves as well. It's grieving for like our parents and their parents, and it kind of opens up
Mm,
to the wider collective grief that we all can feel. And because there's a lot of it, and there's, I feel, conditioning comes in, and grief's not really spoke about much, and it can cut us off, it can remove us from feeling. And that's really important, because we're only able to experience life through those capacities, and the capacity to feel the grief is the capacity to feel the joy, and it's the
mm,
complete contrast of that. And that's really hit home in the last couple of years, of like, my capacity to feel for myself is only the equivalent to feeling it for others, for one.
mm.
But unless I do can feel that for myself and hold myself within that, I will be always trying to get that from others, and feel that void from others. Um, and can I sit with myself and just be there, be that, and soothe? And I think it's very common for us as kids not to get our needs met. Like, it's a
Mm,
whole deep dive into like a lot of things that I think are directly related to childhood.
mm,
And because we live in this culture that really, I don't think serves us as children. I really don't,
mm,
on mass. Um, it's like, what were our needs as a child, and where are the elders that could hold themselves and us within the processes? And I think we need to, which I'm finding, which I'm observing, like, we're reparenting ourselves as elders, to be that then for our children.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's a French psychologist, and I can't remember her name, but she did studies into what is the best way to bring up children. And the environment was when we were cavemen living in small communities and tribes. Because, as you were saying, in terms of unmet needs, whenever a child is crying with a big group of adults, the whole it takes a village to raise a child. If there's a child crying, any one adult can pick it up and comfort it. A child's never alone. A child would be strapped to an adult for the first 18 months or 2 years of their life. And people would be living all together, in big groups of people, as opposed to in separate houses where, you're kind of confined with overstressed parents looking after, a child with all of these other responsibilities and things. And I guess that just creates the endless amounts of disconnection that we all feel.
Hmm.
Mm,
Absolutely. Yeah. Trying to get your needs met from one person is just
mm,
not, it's not possible,
mm.
really. So,
I
yeah.
remember you watching something that you were talking about insulation and isolation.
Yes.
Yeah. What was can you just speak to that?
Yeah, I love it. It really represents like how I see the world as well, and
Mm,
what has happened, and somewhat as our, like, the reason we need to do things is because of evolution, but the reason we don't do things is because of evolution. Um, I had this guy called Fitness Explorer on the podcast, and he framed it in that way. I was like, exactly. We don't want to move. Like, we want to
mm,
conserve our energy. We
mm,
want to stay safe. We want to stay warm. And that kept us alive a long time ago. And that's why we're here. But
mm,
ultimately, that's the thing that's killing us. Like, that
mm,
that hand that reaches for the sweet thing. Like,
mm,
that would have served us really well. But because of the way we're living and where we've got to as a species, and I just think if we're not aware of those things, then we're really going to suffer, because we are animals. Like, we have instincts, we have even like our sexualities, we have sexual urges to bring that in. But it's like we have to like override that with the conscious and awareness that we have also. It's really interesting. So insulation and isolation, the same word in Spanish, it means those same things. We have different words for them, but in Spanish it's the same, and they are the same thing, because when we insulate ourselves, we isolate ourselves also. So you can
mm,
look at, as an example, the foot, the human foot. I think feet, foundation, they're so important. They define the way we move, our bodies, our posture. And when we isolate it, well, when we insulate it, with a shoe, a sock, keep it away, and we protect it. And this thing has been like a mobile adapter. It's got like 4 layers of arch muscle. It's got, 33 articulations. It's a masterpiece of like evolution that has like allowed us to do so much, but we insulate it and protect it and keep it away from feeling, and it isolates it at the same time from the natural world. And we suffer as a process of that. Like, we don't have healthy, strong feet, and as a result, we suffer. It affects our gait, it affects our squat, it affects our hips. I think one of the biggest reasons that allow older people to go into homes is because they can't get up and off the toilet. And we're like we're like the evolutional, like, we're number one on like the evolutionary spectrum of animals, but then we reach a certain age and we can't get up down off the toilet. And it's due to like that mobility, and it starts at the feet. But yeah, another one, probably a better example, would be like the homes that we're in, or the van that I'm in. It's like, oh, I need more insulation, I need more heating. And insulating our homes isolates us from the world, and we need to feel more. Bring in the cold water. It's like a powerful practice. And Wim Hof, of course, talks about this a lot. We're just isolated from our environments, and we will suffer as a result of that, because we are the environment. We do live in the world, and we need to have a connection to it, because it's no surprise that loneliness is also the biggest precursor for death. Like, people isolate themselves from other people, and we don't feel other people anymore. We're very disconnected from that. It seems outrageous that I have to like speak to this. I don't know if is it helping anyone, but I think we know, we understand it. But it's like, what do we do with that information? And really, we can only, of course, do that for ourselves, and as a result of that, speak to it in every possible situation. Maybe we don't have to isolate ourselves too much, and we are, as a reference to that, it's like insulating. What else are we insulating?
I love that around the insulating, but also around the evolutionary thing of like conserving energy, which obviously has helped us survive over the multiple millennia of the human race. But now that is the thing that's keeping us stuck. And it's almost like, if we look at our own coping mechanisms or defenses, the things that throughout our decades of life that have enabled us to get this far, and then we suddenly realize that it's no longer serving us, and actually the thing that's blocking us, it's almost like we've hit that collective point where we recognize that actually so much of what has helped us to survive is actually stopping us from thriving. And hopefully we're reaching that kind of tipping point now. Do you see that do you see a tipping point emerging?
Yeah, I have this kind of thought experiment that goes on. It's like, we have so much like possibility, and back to the opportunity. How can we create a lifestyle that really, like, this is where biohacking comes in, because we have resource and we have the awareness, and those two things, we can really like create an environment that really like doubles down on it all. But I think as much as we can lean on science and tools and AI and all these kind of new inventions to help us thrive in the modern day, the most things that have impacted my experience have been the most simple, and the things that I don't need to do anywhere, and I don't need anything for. I don't need the water to be heated, for example, because it's heated. That's why we have warm water. Well, what's everywhere? Cold water. Okay, that's quite simple. Everywhere I go, I can experience cold water, apart from Brighton, apparently, because it's warm in the taps. But like, it's the simple things. Health is not about adding anything. It's about reducing the amount of things you think you need. It really is that. It's the rewilding aspect of it all. But it sometimes takes time to get there. So yeah, of course we can bring in things like we also that we know that air is sometimes a little polluted. So yeah, we might need to have an air purifier or you know, really think about where the fabrics are coming from. And you can take this to so many different degrees, and I listen to many that do. But it's like really piecing together like our homes, that environment, the lifestyle that we had, the furniture in our home, like just remove the furniture for this experiment. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just remove the furniture, chop those legs off that table, and sit on the floor and see what happens in 6 months. See how you feel. See what changes. But it's uncomfortable, and it's that comfortable factor that really and God, we can relate this to all of the work I do with men. It's really leaning into that discomfort. What's uncomfortable? Fucking talking about what is going on in here. It's so uncomfortable. Like, why would I want to do that? Yeah, well, I get you wouldn't want to do that. But what's on the other side of being uncomfortable? Growth and like magic. The magic happens outside the comfort zone. And it's but where's the motivation then to do that? And it's like, well, the motivation is, you know, when you most felt good, you most felt really good, you know, when was that? Oh, probably when yeah, me and my partner shared this experience and we told each other we loved her and I loved each other. And it's like, okay, so you had a connected moment and you communicated how you felt. It's like, yeah, like that's the motivation, the times in your life where you felt most free and whole and happy. And we know what those moments are. And that's for me, the motivation to move out of the comfort zone constantly. And I think it's really important to stretch that daily. It's a muscle. It's like we go to the gym. It makes sense to go to the gym because we know we're conditioned to know that going to the gym, having a healthy body, strong body is going to be beneficial. Okay. That's just one way in. There's so many ways into strengthening, but it's just an analogy for other things. It's like your muscles, it's not comfortable like going to the gym. It's not really, it gets comfortable because it becomes the norm and you feel good. And that's why it gets comfortable. But it's still, it's still that thing that we need to keep pushing.
Speaking of discomfort and comfort zones, you cycled from London to Istanbul, didn't you? And I heard you say that it really changed the way that you perceived the world. In what way did it help you to change that for yourself?
Yeah, it was like I had an itch. There was this itch, and I got to Turkey, and I definitely scratched the itch. It was like I've definitely scratched this itch, and yeah, how did it change? I mean, going from country to country, like landscape to landscape, in the depths of winter, which I would never do again or recommend. It allowed me to not camp because that would have probably ended up with me not coming home. In that I'd have died. And it allowed me to step foot into other people's homes that I wouldn't have necessarily and be invited into around the dinner table with many different people. And that was such a powerful, do you know what? Not that it was meeting new people and like getting to know different walks of life. It was actually like who showed up in those environments, like in reference to me. Like who was I when I went into that person's home? And there was so much like reflection on like who I'd be with, a 50-year-old from Germany, or like someone like a young girl in Serbia, and like who would show up, like what part of me would show up more in certain environments. And because I've met so many different people, it's just really interesting. Like stretch my comfort zone of like being in different people's homes and what that would signal to me, where I felt most safe, or like what that was like. I think that was really interesting. But like also what the body's capable of doing, like so much. Just when you think you've cycled 40 miles and you've got another 20 to go, and it's it's dark, and you just keep going because you have to. Having accountability to something, because like you've got to get to that next destination, like that changed a lot of like you just reminded me of this actually. It's really good because what was possible in my own physicality was really, really like a lot. Just when you think you just can't do anymore, and you just have to keep going.
Mm.
That was
Mm.
powerful.
Do you feel like that trip was a big catalyst for what you do now, a big part of that journey?
Yeah, I think the loneliness factor, how I had to face
Mm.
that fear of being alone. It
Mm.
was one of the biggest reasons I went, is because I was like, I really had this fear of like dying alone, and it's true for me now. Sure, I don't think that's a particularly preferable thing to do. Like,
Mm.
is it a fear now? No, I think I definitely faced it. I was like, how do you overcome the fear of being dying alone? You just go be alone, and is that okay? And it's like, yeah, I just sat in the woods. No one knows I'm there, and I'm just on my own, and just like in it, and I'm okay. I can just be that, and if that's me, then so be it. So be it. But yeah,
Mm.
that was definitely a big one.
Amazing. It's not something that I picture myself doing in life, but I'm kind of jealous.
I'm sure you could create some form of that. I mean, just cycling is incredible. You just can see so much in such a short space of time. Like, I got so far. It was like 2 months of my time. Like,
Mm.
I spent the same amount as my rent in London, and I was like living pretty well. Um, but cycling a lot. Yeah, yeah. It's definitely possible. We can. That's like a macro version. There's micro versions of it, right? And just not taking the short route home, and just
Mm.
going a different way, and just exploring different spaces, and having
Mm.
conversations with people, leaning into that. Like every day I kind of could play it safe, or I could go and just chat to someone, and meet them and ask them about their
Mm.
life, and just really like those daily doses of that. I'm doing a challenge at the moment in my men's group online, and it was inspired by Neil Donald Walsh, who I heard on Mark Grove's podcast, and he conversations with God. He feels that
Mm.
that intuition is God talking to you. Yeah, I don't know, maybe. And he spoke about how he one day had communicated to the person at the post office counter, like how much he respected him, and he showed up every day, and like, you really have a great sense of humor, and you're really good at what you do. Like, thank you. Thank you.
Mm.
And we have these moments in our day, and it's uncomfortable to do that because we know what we're going to get back. And
Mm.
it's just, we've got to find the words to communicate our experience, or those like really like moments. But the connection in that, and the challenge that we're doing is three people. We got out of our own way to really honor their experience. And it might be a mother who's just a great mom, or on the train, or yeah, someone who's a parking warden who is not favorable by a lot of people, but he gets up in the morning, shows up, and
Mm.
he needs that job to provide for his family. But because of our own judgments, like that it comes in, and we forget that there's a person behind that who
Mm.
has all the makeup of, and we just don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. Just again, micro little moments of where we can stretch that comfort zone.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful, I think, as an adult to be acknowledged, and
Mm.
I know that like as children, many people don't, but I guess it's given perhaps without I guess given in a less filtered way to children, perhaps. But as an adult, I
Mhm.
mean, when I recall times where I've been acknowledged, especially by a stranger, it's an amazing experience to receive.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. But we're all related, right?
Indeed, we are. So you've mentioned that within your mission, a big part of your mission is to create spaces for recognizing forgotten parts of ourselves. So what do
Mm.
these spaces entail? And I know that they might be a podcast, it might be an event, it might be all sorts of it might come out in different mediums. But what do these spaces tend to entail to recognize these forgotten parts of ourselves?
Agreements.
Mm.
I think it's powerful to, and I spoke about it before, like, what do we agree on? I think agreements, what I'm coming to realize, is really important. Just to, and we all do this in some way, I feel. Um, Whatever space we're in, whether we're our friends at a football match or whatever, we're all agreeing on something. It's
Mm.
how we're connecting. We're agreeing that this is valuable. Like we're all agreeing that, we're here for each other, or whatever it might be. I think agreements is really important structure to allow the chaos to ensue. It's like holding space. What does that mean? It's like it's a structure. We're holding something to allow things to exist within it. So the agreements would be that nothing might be shared outside of this. Like you mentioned, there's many aspects of these spaces, and one would be DJing. Like DJing, it's like dance. Like dance is a powerful way in or way back to yourself, to the forgotten parts of yourself that one day someone said, you can't dance or you look silly. It's like, okay, but like, did that serve you? And did you believe that? Because that's their perception. But I think it's the same with singing as well. It's like singing circles can be incredibly powerful because we all think we can or can't sing, but it's just expression. It's creative expression. It can allow us to just feel like love for ourselves and just acceptance of whatever comes out. So agreeing that, yeah, what is discussed or experienced here, it's like, does it need to be talked about after, and agreeing on that potentially to create a safe space. And also that we don't express our opinion unless it's asked. The rescuer, the person within us, often as men, we've grown up with Disney and this idea that women need rescuing and women need saving, and it comes from a nice place, but ultimately it doesn't serve anyone. I don't believe that. We need to be that for ourselves first. How can we give people the permission to go through their experience, ask them what they need? And this can be true in relationships, and it's how we communicate with our bodies, with our words, and how we can really provide an environment for each other to, yeah, go through what we need to go through, cry if we need to cry. Like, I often see people that are like trying to reach out and stop people from feeling their pain. Again, comes from a good place, but is it serving them? Do they need to feel that? Do they need to feel the pain? Maybe, because it's painful. And again, that's your precursor to change something. So really asking permission of each other to share or to offer advice, or I think that's really important. It's not done enough. Speak from our experience. And then the other thing is contributing. Like, well, are we here to just serve ourselves, or are we here to also contribute to the collective experience? I talk about this in ecstatic dance. Like, what are we contributing? We're actually contributing to the future of these events. Maybe that's a men's weekend, because I have something called Men of Earth, and host these intimate gatherings in the woods, and we are contributing to the future for the people that will come in the future. And maybe that's how we share a testimonial at the end, or the content that we might repost, or it might even be that in that space, are we giving it our everything, or are we holding back? Because if we hold back, then we're not fully present. And if we contribute something that we might not want to, that's going to help someone, maybe not here, but maybe in the future, to be here, because it makes up the environment of like the whole event and like what the future of it looks like. So if no one shows up, I'm not going to be doing it anymore. So it's like you're contributing to the future of it. And it's trying to make that something connecting to something bigger outside of yourself, outside of the people here. And it's like that potential of you bringing something of importance or of support, or what that might look like, to a space that then makes it bigger than just you. I think we're very individualistic in our culture, and what that comes at a consequence when we think everything's about us or on us. So those factors are really, really powerful and important. I often speak to.
What forgotten parts of yourself have you discovered through these events, through being on the dance floor, through being at men's retreats, men's circles, men's events? What parts of yourself do you feel have come online most through these experiences?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful question. Thank you for asking. I think the biggest one, of course, is the enough. It's like that I am enough. And of course we are. the only way we can separate ourselves from nature that we're a part of is through our words and how we choose to relate to ourselves. So it makes total sense that we are enough because we just are. And the more work I've delved into around like how we see ourselves and the stories and the narratives that come in, perhaps there was one, and I'll do my best to speak to my experience, because often that's also a way out of, and I do this, it's like a way out of actually answering a question directly or going into my experience, because that's often harder. You have to say, oh, well, we do this, or, you do that, it's hard, but yeah, the I am enough, I've picked up along the way a story that I'm not. And through my journey, that was in reference to, yeah, how I grew up, how I was parented. I think from the ages of 0 to 7, it's like our ego thinks everything is directly related to us. And if we are punished in some way or rewarded in some way, it's a great book, Punished by Rewards. We have an idea that we need to curb out bad behavior. And when I was angry or when I was frustrated, was there any room for that? And I definitely feel as a kid, I would not feel accepted when I was angry or when I was upset or when I was crying my eyes out, just wanting someone to just like soothe me. And it built up a story that's not okay, and that's not a nice thing, and it's bad. And as the great Shakespeare said, like, God, what did he say? He said, oh, there's nothing good and bad, only thinking makes it so. Have you heard that?
I haven't, but love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So our thinking is the only thing that makes things right or wrong.
Yeah.
Like there's really, we put that framework in. And when we say good and bad behavior, or maybe the bad behavior from a parent's point of view is relevant, but labeling it bad, it's just preferable. It's healthy and unhealthy, or like, yeah, I say comfortable, just uncomfortable. It's not necessarily bad, but there was parts of me as a child where I'd feel it's like it's not worthy of love. Parts of me were not worthy of love. And that's the other thing I'd say. It's like the I am not enough. So the enough story comes in around like I need things to make me enough, but it doesn't work that way. From what I've got to realize, like you already are, and it's like the same thing that I say is don't go looking for love, remove everything that's blocking it. Like don't go looking externally for the things that are going to bring in to make you enough. When has that ever worked? It works again, quick fix, makes you feel good in the moment, but like, do you feel that for yourself? Because you are that. It's like you are love, so you are enough. And it's a very common thing that happens with men in these times. It's like we don't feel enough, and we're always looking for that external thing. But it's a journey that maybe I'll never feel completely enough, but every time I do, I'll remind myself that I am, and I'll have little practices and cues to bring me back to that center, that place of feeling enough and feeling worthy of love. Again, the emotion side of things, the things that were allowed, the things that were promoted, the things that were rewarded. We are also punished by rewards. Our behavior is curbed to some degree. It's like, but for a kid, like they're just expressing like as close to what's natural as possible. Like when you look at a child, you know there's not much going on there other than like needs. Are their needs being met? They're not choosing to behave badly. I had a lovely woman on my podcast, Josie Taylor. She's got a positive parenting technique and techniques, and it's all about like really like needs aren't met. It's really not. And I don't have kids. I love learning and diving into this stuff, but I'm also very aware that I do not have children, so it's not as easy as language sometimes makes out, of course. But it's really interesting to lean into. It's like, where is this behavior being expressed the most? And just relating to my experience, it's like parts of me are worthy of love, other parts aren't. But like, is that
Mm.
what's real?
What were the cues and practices that you mentioned to bring you back into that state of enough when you feel like you've gone off center with that? What cues or practices do you find most helpful for yourself?
Communicating my experience with other people. I think that's really important. People that I trust, people that again aren't gonna like tell me, reassure me. They're just gonna hold that space for me. Having people that I trust, that I can really go in with that. Talking, however, only gets us so far. So I feel like it's like, what embodiment practices can I do to really feel that love? And mushrooms, plant ceremonies have been really a big catalyst for that. It's common knowledge now that like psilocybin mushrooms have incredible healing capacities. I think as a man, it's allowed me to feel into my experience. It's been allowed me to be there for myself and stay with an emotion when I feel like there's been a moment in time where I've picked up an energy that might not have been mine, or I've adopted, I've taken for a period of time. It's like, oh, that experience was because that, I'm not worthy of love, or how that leaked out onto other people. I think that the mushrooms have definitely allowed me to just sit with the pain and the discomfort of that, and just to go through that cycle. It's like a stress response can be to just completely hijack our own experience, or just stop feeling and just cut it off and just don't feel anymore. And then that can just then start being a habit of like just cut ourselves off from feeling, because it's like stress is really powerful when you lean into it, of like how we respond to stress and what the nervous system does in those moments. And yeah, we can just stop ourselves from feeling, but we don't. Like animals, they'll go through a cycle of a fight and fight situation. And it might have been really important for me as a kid to stop feeling at certain times, because it would have got me killed. Or I don't know, like I lean into like some of even my dad's experience. Like, it makes total sense that feeling is not accessible all of the time, because expressing that emotion as a child would have got him into trouble, would have got me into trouble. I think it's true for a lot of us. But it's understanding that it makes sense, like acceptance to really transcend any emotion that we do or don't feel. It's like acceptance that it makes sense that I feel that way. I think reminding myself of that, it makes sense. And it's like soothing yourself. It's like, it makes sense that you feel this way. I'm sorry you had to feel that. Like it wasn't on you, but it is
Mm.
now almost. And my
Yeah.
friend Jeff has an amazing saying. It's like, it ran in my family until it ran into me. It ran through
Mm.
my family until it ran into me. And it's beautiful, because it's like, here is the time where I can stop it. I
Yeah.
also hear it's like, we're the first generation of healers that do have the capacity and the bandwidth to say, no, no more. I'm not passing it on.
Mm.
And stopping narratives that may not have been even our parents or even our conditioning, but like these ancestral cycles that have passed down and through, and just come into us through whatever means. You don't have to keep digging. It's been a process of like digging and trying to understand it in the same way it was. You can't solve a problem in the same way it was created, through the mind. Can we do it through the
Mm.
mind? Maybe, but maybe not always. And I think like dancing and breath work, and really going into those subconscious patterns.
Mm.
um I had this guy called Breathvolution on my podcast, and he talked about how when we really trick our nervous system into feeling, it needs to really get ourselves out of the moment through breath work, through conscious breathing, through the autonomic nervous system, activating the subconscious mind comes online, because it throws experiences our way that is trying to get us out of the experience, but we can kind of leverage that to our advantage through the breath. So diving into some breath work now and again, it helps me as well. But I feel my breath work journey hasn't really begun. Like lately, I've been really called to go deeper, and there are some amazing spaces that you can.
Mm, amazing. So all of the emotional repression, or perhaps lack of acceptance with your emotions growing up, some being labeled as worse than others or more preferable than others, and then obviously the link of kind of that anger coming out later in your teenage years. What would you say that as a result of these spaces that you have created and partaken in, what's your relationship to anger now? And how do you want to shift that for people within these spaces?
Yeah, I think it's a big one. I
Mm,
think it's one of the biggest for men that is not really allowed, and we don't have spaces for it to
yeah.
express that anger because it's an energy. Call it anger, has connotations, but it is an energy that if we don't allow it to move through us, and there's safer ways to do it, then it will leak out in other ways. And it will come up in times where you don't have to channel it, or it'll come up just like a stressful situation and you're in your head and you're making decisions, trying to make decisions because when you're stressed, which is often a result of being angry in a stressful environment, that energy comes out a bit more and it's hard to think clearly. Going through it myself, but also just acknowledging that I did some I did some coaching with a friend now called Jeff Shub. He's called that the Urban Barefoot. Had him on the podcast a couple of times. He held space for me in the most uncomfortable way, but a very powerful way of jumping on a call every week and holding the space for me to just be angry, go into it. He talks about like the four primary emotions: anger,
Mm,
sadness, fear, and joy.
yeah.
And he would just penetrate my words directly and go into the experience, like which emotion, where's it coming up, where's it showing up, and it would always come back to anger. And he held the space for me to just to release and just like as a practice, like forget what it means or what you think it means, just really scream into a pillow and do that. Like it requires work, just like going to the gym. You just really stretch that muscle of like see what comes up, and it's so powerful to have that space to be able to just release and let go and just go into what it is like to be angry. And the body keeps the score,
Mm,
as the great book suggests. It does. The issues are in our tissues, and the body will keep memories, and we can activate that by going into the experience and being angry. Having an environment to do that can be really pivotal. It only really, they say anger only really lasts for like 30 seconds. In most environments, it's hard to be like really angry. Rage, on the other hand, is a different energy to it. And that is a more unconscious energy, and it can last for a lot longer and cause more destruction. But like there's a thing, it's healthy anger. Of course, it's the way you channel it. Can we activate it? Can we work with it? Connor Beaton talks about this quite a lot, who I was had the pleasure to be in his community for a while. And he's one of the people I really lean into when I revisit the healthy anger and learn how it's like is or isn't serving me. But on the call with Jeff, I was just going into this experience of like anger and what would come after it, after like a minute of like going from 1 to 10, 10 being the most angry you could possibly be in this moment, and then just coming back down, and loads of emotion, rush of emotion would just come, and then he'd get me to journal and he'd get me to kind of guide me through. And I don't believe you can really do this on your own. You can,
mm,
but there's it's been more beneficial to have someone that can do that with or for you. And in a group setting, it's even more pivotal having the chance to speak about it after. And like these spaces are out there. It's like, if anger is something that comes out and leaks out of you when you don't really want it, then like seek the space. Like there are people for sure that can hold that for you. In those moments, I didn't feel safe to express it. Like I lived in a flat, there was people around me. Like I don't want them thinking like something's wrong, or like having that weight on the experience of like knowing someone's listening. So I
mm,
was like, right, I'm gonna get in my van, and I went to a car park, and like I was there, and I was like, this is even worse because I'm like in a van. If someone hears me screaming, like they're gonna wonder what is going on. So I couldn't. That was just a no. And then I found a space. I found a space underwater,
Oh,
and I was like,
amazing.
"Where's a
Mm.
great space to express, like, and just really shout and just let it out, and like, see what calmness returns." And it was like
Yeah.
going underwater and just expressing. It's powerful, but an interesting reference to like where we lack these spaces to actually go through. I mean, the gym, sure, you can be angry in the gym and not too many people are concerned or upset. So I think that is what allows people to men to go there. It's like to express, to really go to a football match and just like the
Mm.
people that say men aren't emotional. I think go to a football match and you'll see emotional men. Like it's not that we haven't got the capacity, but we haven't got the spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that I'd never thought about that in terms of, you see men in the pub cry when the football team loses, but yet those men at home might struggle to be vulnerable with their families. I'd never thought about it like that. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it
Mm,
also comes down to like what we know and how we've been taught. Like, do
yeah.
we understand the internal environment and have has that been has that been prioritized in our like learning about communication and how to communicate what's inside? Like, it's a skill. It really is a skill to learn about how do I make sense of this experience and how do I communicate that and how can I be present whilst I communicate that? Because it can be quite stressful to really like, yeah, whatever you're receiving back in that moment, maybe it's in a conflict or in a disagreement or in a disconnection, and you're trying to communicate how you feel, but you're in a little bit of stress. Um, that's one thing we do on the events. It's like communicating, like leaning into in a stressful situation, communicating what's important to you, and that really can be like very pivotal in someone's life to go into how are we communicating? Like, are there better ways to communicate? Yes. it's it's like really speaking from your experience,
Yeah.
really like just not projecting and no you statements and really just speaking to your needs, speaking to
Mm,
what's important to you, what you stand for, or what your boundaries are, like getting to know those things. And there's many practices to do that. But yeah, that all this stuff's great, but unless we're able to communicate, it really doesn't mean a lot. We can go away on a weekend and feel great around people in safe environments. We can go to whatever it might be, whatever practice, cold water journey, or like feel held in a group container. But are we integrating that? And that's another
mm,
thing that happened to me. Like I mentioned about the powerful experience of traveling, like heart opening, heart led, great. But did I have any tools to integrate that into my daily life? Like when I came
mm,
back and I've still got this narrative around getting a job and like fitting in and like impressing. And it's like I didn't have any tools to integrate what it means to be like heart led. And I think that's
mm.
a really important thing to lean into for these times. It's like we definitely have been a little disconnected from our hearts. I know I have been,
Yeah.
and I've witnessed a lot. And for these times, it's like what's needed. Like the wise man
Yeah.
does what's needed. And we can define that for ourselves. It's like, what does it mean to be a man in the modern day? It's like, well, we can choose, we can define it for
Mm,
ourselves. It means a whole lot, but what's needed right now? And a lot of the external world has been conquered, like, but the internal world, has that been conquered? Like, what does that look like?
mm. How do you see these spaces contributing to creating a nurturing, meaningful life? When you, for example, think about your Men of Earth spaces and the transformations and the shifts that you witness, how do you feel like these spaces directly support us to create a nurturing, meaningful life?
Hmm. So, in reference to what I just said about it's easy to go away and be held
Mm,
and go for an experience and be guided,
yeah.
learn things and feel safe while doing it in a non-judgmental environment, which we all need. It's like the environment to nurture growth. the impacts of that is what I guess I define as like the ripple. Like why I do it is not to like get more people there. It's to get the people that are there to create that in their own lives. And that's where I've felt the most reward, I guess, or the most proud or the most like energy, where someone comes back and said, I was doing this at home with my kids. We did these exercises. I did that in the family. Like we sat down, I asked for like men to just sit on the ground with their partner and breathe together and then open up a space for like real truth, whatever that looks like, ugly, messy, whatever, but like really regulate with each other and just sit and just be. And like the fact that that is happening from a space and like, I don't think anything is more important than the family home. The family, it's like, of course, like that is really the I don't know if the embryo is the right word, but it's like the nucleus of the of everything. It's like we exist in these families, and good God, there are many statistics in the world of like even single parent homes and the consequences of that. And there's a compassion prison project that they ask all these men in this high security prison to step forward if they lived in a, have you seen this? It's in Heal, it's in the Heal documentary, which I'm sure you've seen. And
Yeah,
it's
and I've
like,
seen it in
wow,
Gabor Mate's Wisdom of Trauma as well.
it's just provides so much context. Like
Yeah.
context is everything. And yeah, we spoke about like humankind, that the book, and it's like everything makes sense in context. It's like, how can we judge other people if it makes sense that they're actually like feeling or acting this way? And it doesn't make it easy, because of course it makes it a lot simpler and a lot easier to be black and white. They are just bad. No changing them, lock them up, like. And I'll come back to the question, but it's like context is everything. And the amount of people and men that are like, and people on the streets or the people really struggling, it's like, well, what was their environment like as children? And more often than not, it wasn't ideal, and it didn't provide them with the tools, the skills to navigate the challenges that we all will face. So that's what I experienced. I experienced people going back home and like repairing relationships and like reapproaching and just diving in to the good things that can come from that. So that's definitely what I witness. And more like people that are self-led, more people that are questioning life, questioning the system, questioning health care, sick care, whatever you choose to call it. But there's like, yeah, there's big questions that need answering. But for ourselves, really, the questions are more powerful than answers, I feel. So like, as long as we're asking the questions, it's like whatever comes up after that. But yeah, redefining their own lives and how they want to live, reconnecting back to their time, like how they spend it. That's what I feel is another big one. How many people are like prioritizing family and nature and their own health and making choices. We vote with our money, don't we? We vote with our money. And yeah, it's those things I think that make the biggest impact, and just the ripples of more spaces and more circles expansion, and the reimagining and remembering of what it means to exist with each other.
Beautiful. I just want to bring in, obviously, the cold water element. You were mentioning how cold water has played a big role in helping you to release anger. You mentioned it just then, of being underwater and doing the screaming, finding a physical place for that. Similarly, a friend and I were really wanting to create this practice of actually just like screaming, shouting, and releasing that like for ourselves. And because it's so important to also strengthen your voice and, you know, create that energy and that feedback as well. And we also went into the sea and just practiced screaming underwater. It was great. Yeah, like really cathartic, really fun. And you don't terrify people in the center of Brighton either. So yeah, it was a great practice for us. But I would love to just have a conversation about how cold water has supported you in creating a nurturing, meaningful life as well.
Beautiful. Cold water. So I feel like delving into this for about 5 years. It's the fourth year I've run the November challenge of 21-day cold water challenge, which as this goes out, it will be live. It's been a very powerful practice to going back. We've covered a lot of like the comfort zones and leaning into that like insulation, isolation. But it's been a powerful practice to kind of reframe like what's good for me, but what's uncomfortable for me. There's a great quote that we have mistaken what is good for us for what is comfortable. So we often associate comfort with what's good for us, but it's definitely not. Acute stress is a game changer. To lean into acute stress, and that can be in many things. And this is that in a nutshell. Like we can lean into the acute stress of the cold. The most powerful thing about it is you never get good at it, and it is the same for everyone. You know, it might, like the conversation gets easier of like, shan't I get in? It's like I had to really lean into that for months of like every day, and the conversation just slowly, surely just got better and better. And now I don't even think, I'm just in. It just makes sense to me. So yeah, that really is the biggest thing of like leaning into something that's gonna strengthen the muscle of stress, leaning into a difficult environment and feeling safe within it, and just being able to relax into that. That is Andrew Huberman. Go to him if you really want to delve into the science. And I could talk about dopamine and how it does wonders for you in that regard. And cortisol doesn't even come into the picture. All these hormones that you associate cortisol with stress, but actually it doesn't spike as much as some people might think. There's so many amazing studies that have now come out in the last couple of years around how beneficial intentional cold water exposure is for you. Circulation, inflammation, metabolism, and what it does to like beige and brown fat, adipose tissue. And it just does so much for the body. Like 21 days, we do a benefit every single day. It's hard though. I feel like when I speak to this practice, it's really mainly for the people who don't get it. But what could be on the other side of that? Because the people that do get it, like you see them, you know that there's cold water communities popping up all over, and it's a common practice now. It's quite common to know, like it's really hit the mainstream. It is the modern day rite of passage of like exposing yourself to something which isn't very nice, but the benefits of it. I think ultimately knowing that we do live comfortable lives, and let's lean into a bit of discomfort and something that there's not many things I don't think in life that you don't get better at, but the cold you just don't. It's just always the same. It's just people say like, oh, you must be so good at it now. I'm like, there is no getting good. You do or do not, and that's it. It's so, but I love that because it's just that yeah. There's obviously disclaimer, like please, if you have suffered from cardiovascular disease in the past, or you've had like heart problems or whatever it might be, like consult your physician, your doctor before entering the practice, because especially natural environments always go with a friend as well first. It's like important, and depending on your age and your health, like there are factors that can provoke like the body from healing as opposed to not. So that's definitely worth mentioning. It just is. It's not for the safety of me of like spouting this advice. It's for the safety of others for sure. But it can aid in so much. It really can. I think circulation is also one of the biggest. It makes sense that your body is trying to keep yourself warm, so it puts up a fight. It's like all your blood rushes to your veins, your capillaries, your arteries, and it's just trying to keep yourself warm. So when you get out, it's like it's just rushing this blood all around your body. And Huberman talks about like the brain and the body, and you kind of, it makes sense also to kind of somewhat separate those, and what happens in the brain and the body and how that communicates with each other, through the process of like the cold water exposure. There's so many different ways to play around with temperature, time. I don't really think anything after 3 minutes, there's many benefits. It's just something where you're really not, you've hit the max, and the benefits after a couple of minutes, it's just not preferable. I mean, I could talk about what's worked for me, what things you can play around with in terms of like putting on a song and just dancing around the shower, going in for like 10 seconds, then 20, then 30, and just continuing for like 7 days if you want to do this by yourself, or creating your own group and just saying like, let's do a cold water challenge, let's do a week of cold water, let's see how we feel. And it's just incredible for you. It really is. There's a lot of benefits, but I think mainly it's more of a psychological for me. It's like the mindfulness, what you get to let go of in that process, what you can leave in the cold and what you go in with, and the mental override, which is really just your ability to do something difficult like that in itself. Like everyone who has the practice in the morning, there are also benefits of doing it before bed, in aiding sleep. Doing it as soon as you wake up, which is arguably the hardest part of the day, because for me, like getting up and going into cold water. I went to Hampstead Ponds yesterday in London, Hampstead Heath, and yeah, like, I didn't want to do that. Like not what my body wants at that time of day. But I dived in, and I'm doing a lap,
Yeah.
and I'm just
Yeah.
like, the moon is just like still bright in the sky, and it was just like, wow, like I get to do this.
Yeah.
But I get to do this also. That's a great reframe of how, rather than you've got to do it, like you really get to, you're privileged to get up and dive into cold water and feel alive, feel every part of your body just come online. I mean, I dare anyone to just do it and tell me they just don't feel any better.
Yeah.
Depending on your stress levels, I think there's something to say about getting into a stressful environment when you're already stressed. I don't think that's beneficial. There is like this kind of window of I guess when it's best for you, and when it's counter. But it's interesting to play with those edges, because it can
Yeah.
override the stress, and it can make you more resilient to the
Mm.
stress, hence the acute stress. But yeah, the mindfulness factor and letting go. When I'm in there, it's like having a mantra of like, it's okay, you're all right, you're safe. And it's just communicating that to your body, and how that can manifest into other situations in your life.
Many of my mornings throughout the last several years living in Brighton have started by heading into the sea and submerging myself, which has been, I mean, easier in summer. Sometimes on those kind of January, February mornings, it can, when there's ice on the pebbles, it can be somewhat challenging. But I'm conscious that you and your van palace need to drive down to Cornwall. So we'll start wrapping up. Was there anything else that you wanted to share today?
I think back to how we entered the conversation with like change and the precursor to that. Sometimes you don't change until the pain of changing is less than the pain you're already in.
Yeah.
Um, and there's nothing certain in life apart from change. Like we're always changing, of course, but I don't really believe there's any staying in the middle or staying still. We're either moving forward and growing, or we're regressing and slowly kind of getting more stagnant, unfortunately. So I really feel there's a lot to say about like answering that call, and the phone's ringing, and this podcast speaks to that. I feel it's like answer the call, but when you get the message, hang up the phone. Like don't keep, it's like we've answered the call maybe, and of course nothing's linear. Like nothing is linear. We go back and forth, but like, is there a phone ringing? Can you feel that something's not right? And also not right in terms of how we are living, how you are living. It is this it? is there more to life? Like that's a common thing that happens. People get into the groove of accepting the way it is, and like getting the car, getting the house, and getting the doing all the things, and then it's like,
Mm.
is this it? Like, is there more to it? Um, and I'd just say, yeah, way more, like way more to feeling every day, waking up. And I'm not there yet. I don't pretend to be, but it's like I do think it's possible to open your eyes in the morning and be fully present and grounded and be really just grateful to be alive, but also have a direct mission that you connect with, and it's like you're on it. And again, nothing's linear, but I believe it's possible to get up, jump out of bed and be like, right, I'm here, I'm ready, and just have that vitality and have that feeling. Because we are such special beings. It's just there's so much that comes into the conversation, but I do just feel like it's possible for that. So like, don't settle. I had that as my screensaver for a long time, and there's room for settling. I like settle now and again for sure. Don't like keep striving if it's not serving you, but like don't settle for things because there's so much more, uh, more to the human existence, more connected weekends to have. Like that features on the page of the men's weekends. It's like, do you feel like there's more to this human experience? Like, are you connected to the mystery of it all, and like the spirit that exists in everything? Is there a deep connection and reverence for life? Can we remember what it feels like to be completely connected with our environment and the people around us? Um, but yeah, comes comes with costs, and I don't blame people for not answering that call, because to feel the joys and the highs and that vitality, you have to feel the lows also. But that's part of it. Knowing that that's part of it, and the more the work you do, it's like the more easier it is to move through that experience.
Yeah, beautiful. How can people get in touch with you? You
Yeah,
have
I
a
think
podcast, you've got your
they'll find
events.
me. Yeah, I'm so passionate about the podcast. Like I love the medium. It's just it did so much for me. It really changed the game for me and
Mm,
continues to do so. It's just such a great, truthful, authentic, non-agendered medium that
mm.
you can really connect with someone and go on a journey with them. So yeah, have the podcast. Maybe I'd love to get you on at some point.
Love to.
And if you answer that, cool. And then yeah, the men's work that I'm diving into 4 events next year. I've got a men's online community, which is a pretty minimal cost
Mm,
for what I believe to be providing like education, value, learning, accountability,
mm,
support, truth, and just yeah, like calls if you want it. And depending on the time, I like to open them for 3 months and then close it as like a bit of a container. 'Cause what I experience with online groups, it's sometimes it just 25 quid goes out your bank every month, and you never really progress. So it's trying to create something that keeps people accountable, and there's an offer for like a one-on-one call a month to keep that conversation and more of a direct of like what we're trying to get from this experience. So that feels good at the moment. A 21-day cold walk challenge, 1st to the 21st. And yeah, more offerings. Like I'm DJing a lot in different spaces, ecstatic dance, which I love so much, not just because it's sociable hours, but it's like it's this normalizing those spaces. How can I make them more accessible for people? That like the gold with that for me is just bringing more people in that don't dance, and that they think it's not for them, and then witnessing what happens in that space. Um, Absolute magic, allowing people to connect with their bodies through music. And I don't think some things just cannot be expressed and accessed other than those environments. It's just like the thing. It's just complete chaos in the body, and it's just like you're letting go of so much and receiving a lot. So yeah, DJing somewhere, but traveling around in the van as well. And yeah, people want to connect, just reach out. Instagram is the best place, really. The Chris Geisler.
amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. There's been so much wisdom and so much great stuff in here. So thank you so much for spending time with me in the podcast today. Much appreciated.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for creating, the magic, the higher love.
It is what we all are. So there you have it, folks. Hope that you enjoyed that conversation, that it sowed multiple seeds of inspiration. You can connect with Chris via his website, thechrisgeisler.com, or via his Instagram, the.chris.geisler, or you can find his podcast as well. If you want to dive literally into his cold water challenge, it's not too late to join, so just hit him up if that feels like a yes for you. If you have any questions, reflections, or takeaways from this episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan, or via my website, www.higher-love.com. Please do take a moment to rate the show and hit follow or subscribe. Until next time, big love.